AITA for refusing to invite my sister to my wedding after years of her meddling in my relationships. I 33F am getting married in a few months to my fiancé, Jake 34M. This is supposed to be one of the happiest times of my life, but it's been overshadowed by ongoing family drama, specifically involving my sister, Emily 36F. For as long as I can remember, Emily and I have had a complicated relationship. We're only 3 years apart, but our personalities couldn't be more different. While I'm more introverted and prefer a quieter life, Emily has always been loud, opinionated, and frankly, overbearing. Growing up, Emily was the golden child in our family. She excelled at sports, had lots of friends, and was always the center of attention. I don't want to sound bitter, but it always felt like I was living in her shadow. If I got an A on a test, Emily had just won an award. If I made a new friend, Emily was being crowned homecoming queen. I tried to be happy for her, but there was always this underlying resentment because no matter what I did, I could never compete. As adults, our relationship didn't improve much. Emily is still the type of person who has to be the center of attention in any situation. Whenever I share good news, she'll one-up me. When I bought my first house, she made a big deal about how her house was bigger and in a better neighborhood. When I got a promotion at work, she brushed it off by talking about how her job was so much more demanding. It's always been like this, but the real issues started when it came to my relationships. Emily has always been overly involved in my love life. I've dated a few guys over the years, and every single time, Emily found a way to sabotage things. When I introduced her to my first serious boyfriend, she spent the entire evening grilling him about his career and finances, making him feel so uncomfortable that he ended the relationship a few weeks later. When I was dating someone else, she went behind my back and told him that I had commitment issues because I'd broken up with my high school boyfriend years ago. That relationship ended too. The worst was when I was dating a guy named Mark about 5 years ago. Mark was sweet, kind, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Emily seemed to like him at first, but then she started making snide comments about how he wasn't ambitious enough for me. She'd bring up his salary in front of our parents or make passive-aggressive remarks about his job. Eventually, Mark told me he couldn't handle the constant scrutiny from my family, specifically Emily, and we broke up. I was heartbroken, and when I confronted Emily about her behavior, she brushed it off and said she was just looking out for me. Fast forward to 2 years ago when I met Jake. Jake is incredible. He's smart, funny, and treats me with so much love and respect. From the beginning, I made it clear to Emily that I didn't want her meddling in this relationship. She promised she'd behave, but unsurprisingly, she didn't. At first, it was little things like making backhanded compliments about Jake's job. He's a teacher, and she implied that it wasn't a real career. Then she started making comments about our timeline for getting engaged, saying things like, "Don't you think you're rushing into this?" even though we'd been together for over a year before Jake proposed. The final straw came a few months ago. Jake and I had just started planning our wedding, and I was so excited to share the news with my family. We decided to host a small engagement party at my parents' house, and I specifically asked Emily to keep things drama-free. During the party, everything seemed fine, until I overheard Emily talking to one of Jake's friends. She was telling him that Jake wasn't good enough for me and that I was settling because I was afraid of being alone. I was furious. Not only was she undermining my relationship, but she was doing it in front of Jake's friends. I confronted Emily that night and told her that her behavior was unacceptable. She tried to play the victim, saying she was just being honest and that I should thank her for looking out for me. I told her that if she couldn't support my relationship, she wouldn't be welcome at my wedding. She rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. After that, I decided to take a step back from my relationship with Emily. I stopped answering her calls and avoided family gatherings where I knew she'd be. My parents noticed the tension and tried to mediate, but they've always had a blind spot when it comes to Emily. They kept telling me that she meant well and that I should let it go because she's family. I told them that being family doesn't give her a free pass to sabotage my happiness. Now, as the wedding approaches, I've made the decision not to invite Emily. I know it's going to cause a lot of drama, but I can't risk her ruining my big day. When I told my parents about my decision, they were livid. My mom said I was being cruel and tearing the family apart. My dad said I was overreacting and that Emily deserved to be there because she's my sister. Even Jake, who's usually on my side, suggested that I should reconsider because he doesn't want my family to resent him. I'm at my wit's end. On one hand, I feel like I have every right to protect my peace and happiness on my wedding day. On the other hand, I don't want to create a permanent rift in my family. Emily has reached out a few times, but she hasn't apologized or acknowledged her behavior. She just keeps saying that I'm being unfair and that I'm overreacting. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to invite my sister to my wedding? Should I just suck it up and let her come, or am I justified in standing my ground? AITA, for refusing to let my parents move in with me despite their financial struggles? I, 36M, have been living a stable, comfortable life for the past decade. I work as a software engineer, earn a decent salary, and recently bought my dream house, a modest but modern 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. Life has been peaceful, but that peace is now under threat due to escalating tensions with my parents, Lisa, 62F, and Greg, 64M. To provide some context, my relationship with my parents has always been rocky. Growing up, I wouldn't describe my childhood as traumatic, but it was far from ideal. My parents weren't abusive, but they were neglectful in ways that left lasting marks. They had a habit of making poor financial decisions, often putting their wants over their needs. We weren't destitute, but money was always tight, largely because my parents prioritized things like vacations and new gadgets over paying bills or saving for emergencies. I remember nights when the electricity got cut off because the bill hadn't been paid on time, yet we had a brand new TV in the living room. As a child, I didn't understand much of this. I just assumed that was how life worked. But as I got older, I realized that their financial instability wasn't due to bad luck. It was due to bad choices. My parents often lived beyond their means and justified their actions by saying, "We only live once." It didn't seem to bother them that their choices impacted me and my younger sister, Claire, 34F. We grew up with a lot of stress about things kids shouldn't have to worry about, like whether we'd have enough food for the week or if we could afford new school supplies. Despite all this, I've tried to maintain a cordial relationship with my parents. I've set boundaries, but I've also helped them out financially on several occasions over the years. Whether it was covering their rent when they fell behind or paying for unexpected car repairs, I've always been the one they turned to when things went south. It frustrated me, but I didn't want to see them struggle. Claire, on the other hand, has taken a more hands-off approach. She's married with 2 kids and has a lot on her plate, so she's been less involved in our parents' issues. Things took a turn for the worse about 6 months ago. My parents called me in a panic, saying they were about to be evicted from their rental home. They'd fallen behind on rent after Greg lost his job, and their landlord wasn't willing to negotiate. I felt bad for them, but I couldn't help wondering how they'd managed to blow through their savings so quickly. I asked if they'd looked into assistance programs or tried to work out a payment plan, but they brushed off my suggestions and said they needed immediate help. Reluctantly, I loaned them enough money to cover 2 months of rent. I made it clear that this was a one-time thing and that they needed to figure out a long-term solution. Well, they didn't. Greg hasn't found a new job, and Lisa has been working part-time at a retail store, which barely covers their basic expenses. They called me again last month, saying they were officially out of options and would need to move out of their rental by the end of the year. This time, they didn't ask for money, they asked if they could move in with me. I was taken aback. While I do have the space in my house, the idea of living with my parents again fills me with dread. I've spent years building a life that's free from the chaos and instability that defined my childhood. Letting them move in would mean inviting that chaos back into my life. I told them I needed time to think about it, but deep down, I knew my answer would be no. Over the next few weeks, I weighed my options and talked to a few close friends about the situation. Most of them understood my hesitation, but a few thought I was being too harsh. "They're your parents," one friend said. "You wouldn't be where you are without them." That comment stung, because while it's true that my parents provided for me in the bare minimum sense, I've worked hard to overcome the disadvantages their choices created. My success is despite them, not because of them. When I finally called my parents to give them my decision, it didn't go well. I told them I wasn't comfortable letting them move in, but I was willing to help them find other solutions. I offered to help them look for affordable housing options and even said I'd pay for a consultation with a financial advisor to help them get back on track. My parents weren't interested. Lisa started crying, saying I was abandoning them in their time of need. Greg was angrier, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. He brought up all the times they'd sacrificed for me when I was growing up, as if that erased all the poor decisions they'd made along the way. The conversation ended with them saying they didn't know how they'd manage without me and that I was essentially leaving them to be homeless. I felt terrible, but I also knew I had to stand firm. I've spent too much of my life cleaning up their messes, and I can't keep putting my own well-being on the line to fix their mistakes. Since then, things have been tense. My parents aren't speaking to me, and Claire has weighed in, saying she understands my perspective but thinks I should reconsider. She suggested we split the responsibility, with them living with me for a while and her helping out financially. I told her I wasn't willing to budge on this, and if she felt so strongly about it, they could move in with her. She quickly backtracked, saying her house is too small and her kids need their space. Now I'm left feeling like the villain of the family. I've started second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm being too cold-hearted. On one hand, I believe in personal accountability and feel like my parents need to face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, they're still my parents, and the thought of them struggling, or worse, ending up homeless, makes me feel sick. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to let my parents move in with me? Or should I set aside my grievances and give them the help they're asking for? AITA, for refusing to give my husband access to the inheritance my father left me? I, 39F, have been married to my husband, Tom, 42M, for 12 years. We have 2 kids together, ages 10 and 7. On the surface, our marriage has been fairly stable. We both work full-time jobs, split most household responsibilities, and try to support each other as much as possible. But money has always been a sensitive subject in our relationship. Tom and I grew up in very different financial circumstances, and it's created a fundamental difference in how we view and handle money. Tom comes from a family that always struggled financially. His parents worked multiple low-paying jobs to make ends meet, and Tom had to start working at 16 to contribute to the household. He's a very live-in-the-moment kind of person when it comes to money. He believes money is meant to be spent and enjoyed, which I can understand to an extent, given his upbringing. However, this approach has led to some tension between us, especially when it comes to saving for the future. On the other hand, I grew up in a more financially stable household. My dad was a meticulous saver and investor, and he passed those habits down to me. He taught me the importance of building a safety net and planning for the future. Because of this, I've always been careful with money. I have a 401k, an emergency fund, and I track our expenses to make sure we're staying within our means. While Tom contributes to the household financially, he's never been as disciplined about saving or budgeting as I am, and it's been a recurring issue throughout our marriage. The real conflict began 6 months ago when my father passed away. It was devastating for me, as I was very close to him. In his will, my dad left me a substantial inheritance, around $350,000, as well as some valuable family heirlooms. He was very clear in his will that this money was meant for me alone. He even went so far as to specify that it shouldn't be used to pay off shared debts or go into a joint account. He knew how careful I am with money and wanted to ensure I had a financial safety net, especially since he wasn't confident in Tom's ability to handle finances responsibly. When I first told Tom about the inheritance, he was supportive and sympathetic. But as the weeks went by, his attitude began to shift. He started making comments about how we could use the money to pay off our mortgage or upgrade to a bigger house. I told him that I didn't think that was what my dad would have wanted, and that I planned to honor his wishes by keeping the money in a separate account. I explained that I wanted to invest it and save it for the kids' college tuition, our retirement, or emergencies. Tom didn't take this well. He argued that we're a team and that it didn't make sense for me to keep the money separate. He said it was unfair for me to have access to such a large sum of money while he had none, and he accused me of not trusting him. I tried to explain that it wasn't about trust. It was about respecting my dad's wishes and ensuring our family's long-term financial security. But Tom wouldn't let it go. The arguments escalated over the next few months. Tom started bringing up the inheritance every chance he got. If I suggested we cut back on expenses to save more money, he'd snap back with, "Why should we? You're sitting on a fortune." If I mentioned anything about the kid's future, he'd say, "Well, you've got that covered with your secret stash." It felt like he was using the inheritance as a way to avoid taking responsibility for our financial decisions. Things came to a head last month when Tom proposed using a portion of the inheritance to start his own business. He's always dreamed of opening a sports bar, and while I admire his ambition, I know how risky small businesses can be. I told him that I didn't think it was a good idea to use the inheritance for something so uncertain, especially when we already have a stable income. He blew up at me, accusing me of being selfish and unsupportive. He said I didn't believe in him and that I was putting my dad's wishes above our marriage. Since then, things have been incredibly tense between us. Tom has started acting cold and distant, and I can tell he resents me for not sharing the inheritance. He's even brought it up in front of our friends and family, framing it as if I'm hoarding money that could benefit our entire household. This has led to some awkward conversations, with a few family members subtly implying that I should compromise for the sake of our marriage. To make matters worse, Tom's parents have now gotten involved. They called me recently to say that they think it's wrong for me to keep the money separate and that I should trust Tom enough to share it with him. They even went so far as to say that my dad was controlling for putting those restrictions in his will and that I was being disrespectful to Tom by following them. I'm starting to feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, I want to honor my dad's wishes and ensure that the money is used wisely. On the other hand, I don't want this to destroy my marriage. I've tried to compromise by suggesting that we sit down with a financial advisor to come up with a plan that benefits our family while still preserving the bulk of the inheritance for the future. But Tom refuses to entertain the idea. He insists that the money should be ours to use however we see fit. I've always believed that marriage is a partnership, and I feel guilty for not sharing the inheritance. But at the same time, I can't shake the feeling that Tom's reaction is more about control than anything else. If the roles were reversed and he'd inherited the money, I'd respect his right to decide how it's used. I also worry that if I give in now, it will set a precedent for how we handle future financial decisions, and I'll end up regretting it. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to give my husband access to the inheritance my dad left me? Or am I justified in wanting to keep it separate and honor my dad's wishes? AITA for refusing to name my baby after my late sister despite family pressure? I, 30F, am currently 7 months pregnant with my first child, a baby girl, and what should be an exciting time has turned into a stressful family nightmare. My husband Ethan, 33M, and I are beyond thrilled to become parents, and we've been meticulously planning everything from the nursery to names. However, the issue of the baby's name has turned into a major point of contention with my family, particularly my mother. For some background, I grew up in a close-knit but complicated family. I was the youngest of 3 girls. My middle sister, Grace, tragically passed away in a car accident 6 years ago when she was just 28. Grace's death was devastating for our family. She was vibrant, kind, and always the center of attention. Losing her left a void that still felt to this day. Grace and I had a complicated relationship. While I love her deeply, she was undeniably my parents' favorite. This favoritism wasn't subtle, and it shaped much of my childhood. Grace was the golden child who could do no wrong, while my oldest sister, Beth, now 35F, and I often felt like afterthoughts. If Grace got an A on a test, it was celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant. If I got an A, it was met with a lukewarm, "Good job." This dynamic carried into adulthood, and while I tried to accept it, it left some scars. When Grace passed, my parents were understandably devastated, and I did everything I could to support them. I helped with funeral arrangements, spent hours comforting my mom, and even put my own grief on the back burner to make sure they were okay. Despite this, it often felt like my pain was secondary to theirs because, as my mom put it, "You'll never understand what it's like to lose a favorite child." That comment still haunts me. Fast forward to now. When I announced my pregnancy, my parents were overjoyed. My mom immediately began suggesting names, and it was clear she had one in mind, Grace. At first, I thought she was joking. I smiled and said, We haven't decided on a name yet, but she pressed, saying, it would mean so much to us if you named her after your sister. I didn't know how to respond. Ethan and I had already decided on a name, Charlotte. We both love the name, and it has personal significance to us. I explained this to my mom, thinking she'd understand, but she didn't. She got visibly upset and said, how could you not honor your sister? This is your chance to keep her memory alive. Over the next few weeks, the pressure from my mom intensified. She started bringing up the name Grace every time we talked, and when I told her again that we'd chosen a different name, she accused me of being selfish. Grace was such an important part of our family, she said. Don't you want your daughter to know about her amazing aunt? The thing is, I do want my daughter to know about Grace. I plan to share stories about her, show her pictures, and make sure she understands how special her aunt was. But I don't think naming my child after her is the only way to honor her memory. Besides, I have mixed feelings about tying my daughter to someone she'll never meet, especially given the complicated dynamics surrounding Grace's role in our family. Ethan has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. He thinks we should stick to the name we chose and has offered to talk to my mom himself, but I know that would only make things worse. My mom has always been sensitive about outsiders getting involved in family matters, and I don't want to drag Ethan into the drama. The situation escalated last weekend at my baby shower. My mom brought up the name again in front of the guests, saying something like, I can't wait to meet little Grace. It was incredibly awkward. I tried to deflect by changing the subject, but she wouldn't let it go. Finally, I had to pull her aside and tell her, in no uncertain terms, that we weren't naming the baby Grace. She started crying and said I was disrespecting Grace's memory and causing her unnecessary pain. She left the shower early, and now the rest of my family is involved. Beth called me later to say she understood where I was coming from, but thought I should consider compromising to keep the peace. She suggested using Grace as a middle name, but even that feels like giving in to pressure. I don't want to make decisions about my child's name based on guilt or to appease others. Ethan and I chose Charlotte because it's a name we both love, and I believe that's what matters most. Since the shower, my mom has barely spoken to me. She's been telling extended family members that I'm heartless and trying to erase Grace from our lives. My dad has stayed out of it, but I can tell he's uncomfortable with the tension. Some family members have reached out to say they agree with my mom, while others think she's overreacting. The whole thing has left me feeling emotionally drained. I've started second-guessing myself. Am I being selfish by refusing to use the name Grace? Am I prioritizing my own preferences over my family's grief? Or is my mom asking too much by expecting me to carry on Grace's legacy in this specific way? I don't want to hurt my mom, but I also don't want to compromise on something so personal and important to me and Ethan. So, Reddit. Am I the asshole for refusing to name my baby after my late sister, despite the pressure from my mom and the rest of my family? Or should I put my own feelings aside and honor Grace in the way my mom wants? AITA for refusing to financially support my stepson's wedding and sticking to my no loans for family policy. I, 45M, have been married to my wife, Laura, 43F, for 10 years. When we got married, she brought her son, Jason, 25M, into the family. Jason's biological father hasn't been in his life since he was a toddler, and I've tried my best to be a supportive stepfather. I wouldn't say Jason and I are extremely close, but we've always had a respectful relationship. However, the events of the past few months have caused a rift between us, and now I'm being painted as the villain in my own home. To set the stage, Jason got engaged to his fiancée, Emily, 24F, about a year ago. They've been together since college, and she seems like a lovely person. They've decided to have a big wedding with all the bells and whistles. I get it. Weddings are a once-in-a-lifetime event for most people, and they want to celebrate in a way that feels special. The problem is that Jason and Emily don't have the financial means to pull off the kind of wedding they're envisioning. Jason recently came to Laura and me to ask for financial help. He's looking to fund a wedding that's estimated to cost around $50,000. He saved some money, and Emily's parents have committed to contributing $15,000, but that still leaves them short by about $20,000. Jason asked if we could cover the difference. Now here's where things get tricky. I have a long-standing personal policy of not loaning or gifting money to family members unless it's for an emergency. I've seen firsthand how money can ruin relationships, and I've always believed it's better to keep financial matters separate from family dynamics. I made this clear to Laura when we got married, and she agreed with me at the time. Over the years, I've stuck to this rule, even when it's been difficult. I've turned down requests for loans from my own siblings and cousins, and I've never asked them for money either. When Jason made his request, I told him that while I was happy for him and Emily, I wouldn't be contributing financially to the wedding. I explained my reasoning and emphasized that it wasn't personal. It's just a boundary I've always maintained. I offered to help in other ways, like assisting with planning or contributing my time and skills to cut costs. For example, I'm pretty handy with carpentry and offered to build a custom arch for their ceremony or help create DIY centerpieces. I thought this was a fair compromise, but Jason was visibly upset. Afterward, Laura confronted me. She said that while she understood my policy, this situation was different because Jason is basically my son and this is a major milestone in his life. She argued that I should make an exception this one time to show Jason that I support him. I told her that my refusal to fund the wedding didn't mean I wasn't supportive. I'm happy to be there for him emotionally and practically, but I won't go against a principle I've held for decades. Things have been tense in the house since then. Jason has been distant and barely speaks to me. Laura keeps dropping hints about how important this wedding is to Jason and how I'm putting my stubbornness ahead of family. She even brought up times when I've spent money on what she considers frivolous things like upgrading my car or taking a solo trip to visit old friends. I countered that those were personal decisions about my own money and didn't involve anyone else. She didn't seem to see the distinction. The situation escalated when Jason and Emily invited us over for dinner to talk about the wedding. I assumed it was a casual update, but it quickly turned into a group effort to convince me to change my mind. Emily's parents were there, and they spoke about how much it would mean to Jason and Emily if I stepped up to help. Emily even started crying, saying that she didn't want financial stress to overshadow their big day. While I sympathized with their emotions, I felt ambushed and stood my ground. I reiterated that I wouldn't be contributing money, but was happy to help in other ways. After that dinner, Jason stopped talking to me altogether. Laura has been cold as well, and she's hinted that she might cover the $20,000 herself, even though she doesn't have that kind of money saved. If she does, it would likely mean dipping into our joint savings or taking on debt, which I strongly oppose. We've worked hard to build a stable financial foundation, and I don't want to jeopardize that for a one-day event. To make matters worse, word has gotten out to extended family. Laura's sister called me selfish and said I was ruining Jason's wedding. My own parents are divided. My dad supports my decision, but my mom thinks I should make the exception for the sake of family harmony. I've even received texts from Jason's friends, accusing me of being a cheapskate. It feels like everyone is ganging up on me, and I'm starting to question whether I'm in the wrong. On one hand, I feel like I've been clear and consistent about my boundaries. I've never wavered on my no loans for family rule, and I don't think it's fair for Jason to expect me to change it now. On the other hand, I can't ignore how much this has hurt him and Laura. Part of me wonders if I'm being too rigid and should make an exception for the sake of peace. But if I cave now, what happens the next time someone asks for financial help? Where do I draw the line? So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to financially support my stepson's wedding, even though it's caused a major rift in my family? Or am I justified in sticking to my principles, even if it makes me look like the bad guy? AITA for kicking my brother and his family out of my house after they disrespected my late wife. I 40M, lost my wife, Sarah, 4 years ago to cancer. She was my best friend, my soulmate, and the love of my life. Sarah and I were married for 12 years, and during that time, we built a life and home that we were both proud of. Losing her was devastating, but I've tried to honor her memory by keeping the home we shared as a reflection of the life we built together. Our house is filled with things that remind me of Sarah. Photos, artwork she created, her favorite books, and small mementos from trips we took together. I find comfort in these items, and while I've moved forward in some ways, I don't feel the need to erase her from my life. After Sarah passed, I became very close to my younger brother, Mark, 35M, and his family. Mark has a wife, Lisa, 34F, and 2 kids, ages 7 and 5. Mark has always been a bit of a free spirit, and while we've had our differences in the past, I've tried to be there for him. A few months ago, Mark and Lisa hit a rough patch financially. Mark lost his job, and they couldn't afford their rent anymore. They asked if they could stay with me temporarily while they got back on their feet, and I agreed. I've got a decent-sized house with plenty of space, and I figured it was the least I could do for family. At first, things were fine. It was an adjustment having kids running around the house, but I didn't mind. The kids are sweet, and I thought it would be nice to have some life and energy in the house again. However, tension started to rise about a month in. Lisa, in particular, seemed uncomfortable with the amount of Sarah's things around the house. She started making comments like, "Don't you think it's time to pack some of this stuff away? And it must be hard for you to move on with all these reminders everywhere." I told her that I appreciated her concern, but that I wasn't interested in removing Sarah's things. They're not just reminders of her. They're part of my home and my life. Lisa dropped it at first, but the comments didn't stop. She'd make offhand remarks about how it must be weird for guests to see so many photos of Sarah, or how the house felt like a shrine. Mark didn't say much during these exchanges, but he also didn't defend me, which hurt. Things escalated 2 weeks ago when I came home from work to find that several of Sarah's photos and personal items had been removed from the living room. Lisa was sitting on the couch, and when I asked her what had happened, she said, "I thought it might be time for a little redecorating." The kids were asking questions, and I didn't think it was healthy for them to be surrounded by all this. I was furious. I told her she had no right to touch Sarah's things or make decisions about my home. She tried to argue that she was only trying to help and that I needed to let go of the past. Mark finally stepped in, but instead of siding with me, he said I was overreacting and that Lisa had a point. He accused me of clinging to Sarah's memory in a way that was preventing me from moving forward. I told them both that this was my home, and if they couldn't respect that, they needed to find somewhere else to stay. That night, I packed up their things and told them they had a week to leave. They were shocked and kept insisting that I was being unreasonable, but I stood my ground. Over the next few days, they tried to apologize and smooth things over, but the damage was done. I felt betrayed and disrespected in my own home, and I couldn't imagine continuing to live with them. Mark and his family have since moved in with Lisa's parents, but the fallout has been intense. Mark has been sending me angry texts, accusing me of putting Sarah's memory above my living family. My parents are also upset with me, saying I should have handled the situation more diplomatically and that kicking Mark and his family out was too extreme. They think I should have been more understanding of the stress they're under and that I let my emotions get the better of me. Some of my friends, however, think I did the right thing. They say that Lisa and Mark crossed a major line by touching Sarah's things and that I was right to stand up for myself. I've been trying to move on with my life in a way that feels authentic to me, and I don't think that means erasing Sarah from my home. Still, the backlash from my family has made me question whether I overreacted. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for kicking my brother and his family out of my house after they disrespected my late wife's memory? AITA, for refusing to let my parents move into the house I inherited from my grandfather, even though they're struggling. I, 28M, recently inherited a house from my late grandfather. It's a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, and I can't even begin to express how much it means to me. My grandfather and I were incredibly close. Growing up, I spent countless weekends and summers at his house. He was like a second father to me, and we shared a bond that no one else in my family seemed to have. My parents, on the other hand, have always had a strained relationship with me. They divorced when I was 10, and the years following their split were full of chaos. My dad, 58M, is a gambler, and my mom, 56F, has always been more focused on her social life than her responsibilities. They were never outright abusive, but they were neglectful in many ways. There were nights when I didn't know where my next meal would come from because my dad blew his paycheck at the casino, or my mom forgot to grocery shop because she was out with friends. As a result, my grandfather became my safe haven. He stepped in when my parents wouldn't or couldn't. He helped me with school projects, taught me how to ride a bike, and made sure I had food to eat and clothes to wear. When I went to college, he was the one who supported me financially and emotionally. My parents contributed almost nothing. When my grandfather passed away a year ago, I was devastated. Losing him felt like losing the only person who had truly been in my corner my entire life. His will was straightforward. He left me his house and a small savings account, while my parents got nothing. This wasn't a surprise to anyone, as my grandfather had been vocal about his disappointment in how they treated me and their own lives. He had warned them for years to get their acts together, but they never did. After inheriting the house, I decided to move in. I've been working remotely, so it's been a great opportunity to save money and live somewhere that feels meaningful to me. I've spent the last 6 months fixing it up, as it had fallen into some disrepair in my grandfather's final years. It's become my sanctuary, a place where I feel close to him and where I can build a future. About 2 months ago, my mom called me in tears. She said she was being evicted from her apartment because she couldn't afford the rent. She had recently lost her job and claimed she had no savings. She asked if she could move into the house temporarily until she got back on her feet. Before I could even process what she was asking, my dad reached out with a similar request. He had apparently been evicted as well due to unpaid rent, likely tied to his gambling issues. They didn't know that the other had already contacted me, so I ended up with 2 separate pleas from both parents, asking to move into the house I inherited from the very man they had neglected and taken for granted. I told them both no. My reasoning was simple. This house is my home, and it's the one thing my grandfather left me to protect and cherish. Letting either of them move in would disrupt the peace and stability I've worked so hard to create. I don't trust them not to bring chaos into my life. My dad has a history of gambling and lying about money, and my mom has a track record of irresponsibility. I knew that if I let them move in, they'd treat me like a live-in landlord, not a son, and I'd likely never get them to leave. When I told my mom, she cried and called me ungrateful. She said that no matter what happened in the past, she's still my mother and deserves my help. My dad reacted with anger, accusing me of being selfish and saying that family should stick together. He also tried to guilt-trip me by bringing up all the times he had sacrificed for me, though I honestly can't think of any examples. To make matters worse, my parents have now teamed up. They've been calling me non-stop, leaving voicemails and texting me about how I'm abandoning them in their time of need. They've involved extended family, who are also pressuring me to let them move in. My aunt called me last week and said, "I understand they weren't perfect parents, but they're still your parents. You have a roof over your head, and they don't. How can you be so cold?" I've tried to explain my side to those who will listen. I've pointed out that my parents' situations are a result of their own poor choices and that they've had plenty of chances to turn things around. I've reminded them that my grandfather explicitly wanted me to have this house, and that letting my parents move in would go against his wishes. But no matter what I say, it feels like I'm being painted as the villain. The guilt is starting to weigh on me. I wonder if I'm being too harsh or if there's a middle ground I'm not seeing. Could I let them stay for a short period under strict conditions? Should I offer financial help in some other way? Or am I right to protect my peace and keep them out of the house entirely? Reddit. Am I the asshole for refusing to let my parents move into the house I inherited from my grandfather, even though they're struggling and I have the space? AITA for refusing to allow my sister and her husband to name their baby after me and for ruining the family dynamic? I, 35M, have always had a complicated relationship with my family, particularly my younger sister, Beth, 31F. Growing up, I was the responsible older sibling, and Beth was the free spirit who got away with everything. My parents doted on her, excusing her mistakes and often shifting the blame for family conflicts onto me. Over time, this pattern created a lot of resentment, but I always tried to stay cordial for the sake of family harmony. A bit of background on my current life. I live several states away from my family. I moved for college and never went back, primarily because I wanted to escape the constant drama and favoritism. I now work as an engineer, own a modest house, and live a quiet life with my fiancée, Emily, 34F. My parents occasionally visit, but I've largely maintained a healthy distance from the rest of the family. Beth, on the other hand, stayed in our hometown, got married to her high school sweetheart, Jake, 32M, and now they're expecting their first child. When Beth announced her pregnancy last year, I was genuinely happy for her. We've had our differences, but I figured this could be a fresh start for our relationship. I even sent her a thoughtful baby gift and offered to help financially if she ever needed anything during her maternity leave. Fast forward to last month. Beth and Jake threw a small gender reveal party, which I couldn't attend due to work obligations and the distance. However, during a video call the next day, Beth and Jake told me they were expecting a boy. I congratulated them again and thought that was the end of it. Then Beth dropped the bombshell. They wanted to name their son after me. Specifically, they wanted to name him Michael, which is my first name, as a way to honor me for being such an inspiration in their lives. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I asked Beth why she wanted to name her son after me, especially given our rocky relationship. She gave me a speech about how, despite our differences, I'd always been a good role model and a steady presence in her life. Jake chimed in, saying they thought it would be meaningful to give their son a name tied to family. Here's the thing. While their reasoning might sound sweet on the surface, I know Beth well enough to recognize when she's being manipulative. Over the years, she's had a habit of spinning situations to her advantage. Naming her son after me felt less like a genuine gesture and more like a way to look good in front of the family while glossing over our complicated history. I was also uncomfortable with the idea of sharing my name with my nephew, especially since it would likely lead to more awkward dynamics in the future. I told Beth and Jake that while I appreciated the thought, I didn't feel comfortable with them naming their son after me. I explained that I didn't want the responsibility or expectations that might come with it, and I also didn't think it was appropriate given our past issues. I suggested they choose a name that held meaning for them as a couple, rather than tying it to me. Beth immediately got defensive. She accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, claiming that I was rejecting their olive branch and ruining a beautiful moment for their family. Jake stayed quiet, but it was clear he agreed with her. I stood my ground and reiterated that I wasn't trying to hurt their feelings, but I couldn't support the decision. After the call, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Beth told my parents about our conversation, and they were furious with me. My mom called me, saying I had crushed Beth's feelings and was being petty over old grievances. She argued that I should be honored they wanted to name their son after me, and that refusing was a slap in the face to the entire family. My dad was less dramatic, but still suggested I apologize to keep the peace. The situation escalated even further when Beth posted about it on social media. She didn't name me directly, but she wrote a long, passive-aggressive post about how some people can't put the past aside for the sake of family, and how she was heartbroken by the lack of support. Predictably, this led to extended family members messaging me, asking why I was causing drama and whether I'd reconsider. Emily, my fiancée, has been my rock through all of this. She agrees that Beth's request was inappropriate and believes I did the right thing by setting boundaries. However, the constant pressure from my family is starting to wear on me. I'm being painted as the bad guy for refusing what they see as a simple, heartfelt gesture, and I'm questioning whether I could have handled the situation better. To make matters worse, Beth and Jake have now doubled down. They're still planning to name their son Michael, whether I like it or not. Beth claims this is their way of showing me that they don't need my approval, but I can't shake the feeling that it's all a power play. My parents are fully on board, saying I should be the bigger person and embrace the name as a sign of family unity. I don't know what to do at this point. On one hand, I feel like I've been clear about my boundaries and have every right to say no. On the other hand, the backlash has been overwhelming, and part of me wonders if I should have just gone along with it to avoid the fallout. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to let my sister and her husband name their baby after me, even though it's caused a massive rift in my family? AITA for refusing to attend my brother's wedding after he uninvited my wife? This situation has left me questioning everything about my family, so I need an outside perspective. My brother Tom, 32M, is getting married in 2 months. I, 34M, was thrilled for him when he announced his engagement to Anna, 29F, last year, and I was even happier when he asked me to be his best man. Tom and I have always been close, despite some family drama over the years, and I was looking forward to standing by his side on one of the biggest days of his life. The issue revolves around my wife, Sophie, 33F. Sophie and I have been married for 5 years, and we've been together for almost a decade. She's my best friend, my partner in everything, and one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. Unfortunately, Sophie and Anna have never gotten along. There wasn't any major blowout or fight. They're just very different people, and their personalities clash. Sophie is introverted and straightforward, while Anna is outgoing but tends to be passive-aggressive when she doesn't get her way. Over the years, there have been minor disagreements between them, but nothing that I would classify as serious. Things started to go downhill about 6 months ago when Anna began planning her bridal party. She initially asked Sophie to be a bridesmaid, which Sophie politely declined. Sophie explained that she's not comfortable in the spotlight and didn't want to take on a role where she felt out of place. She assured Anna it wasn't personal and that she was happy to help with other wedding-related tasks. Anna seemed to take it well at the time, but later, Tom mentioned that Anna was upset and felt rejected by Sophie's decision. Since then, Anna has made several snide comments about Sophie. For example, during a family dinner, Anna joked that Sophie doesn't know how to be part of a team and said something along the lines of, "It's okay, not everyone is cut out for weddings." Sophie brushed it off, but I could tell she was hurt. I brought it up with Tom, who apologized on Anna's behalf, but said she was just stressed about the wedding and not to take it personally. Fast forward to last month. Tom and Anna hosted an engagement party, and everything seemed fine at first. Sophie and I arrived, congratulated them, and mingled with family and friends. About halfway through the night, Anna pulled me aside and asked if I could keep Sophie in check. When I asked what she meant, she said that Sophie was being awkward and ruining the vibe by not engaging with enough people. I told Anna that Sophie was just being herself and that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Anna rolled her eyes and said, "Well, I hope she doesn't act like this at the wedding." I didn't tell Sophie about that conversation because I didn't want to upset her, but I did confront Tom later. He once again brushed it off, saying Anna was under a lot of pressure and that I should just let it go. Then came the bombshell last week. I received a call from Tom, who sounded nervous. He told me that Anna no longer wanted Sophie to attend the wedding. According to Tom, Anna feels that Sophie's energy doesn't align with the vibe she wants for her big day and thinks it would be better for everyone if Sophie stayed home. I was stunned. I asked if he was seriously uninviting my wife, and he said it was Anna's decision, not his. He added that he hoped I would still attend because he needs me as his best man. I told Tom that there was no way I was going to attend his wedding if my wife wasn't welcome. He tried to argue that it wasn't a big deal and that Sophie would understand, but I shut him down. I told him that Sophie is my family and my priority, and if she's not invited, I'm not coming either. Tom got defensive and accused me of overreacting and making this about me. He said I was being unfair and putting him in a tough spot. Since then, the entire family has gotten involved. My parents think I'm overreacting and should just go to the wedding to keep the peace. My mom said, "It's one day. Sophie will survive." My dad agreed and added that I shouldn't let Anna's bridal stress ruin my relationship with my brother. On the other hand, Sophie is heartbroken but supportive of my decision. She's told me multiple times that she doesn't want to be the cause of a rift between me and my family, but I can tell she's deeply hurt by the whole situation. The fallout has been massive. Tom and I haven't spoken since our last phone call, and Anna has been telling mutual friends that Sophie and I are being dramatic and selfish. Some of our relatives have taken their side, saying I should suck it up for the sake of family, while others think Tom and Anna are completely out of line. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of a no-win situation. No matter what I do, someone is going to be upset, and it's making me question whether I handled this the right way. So, Reddit. Am I the asshole for refusing to attend my brother's wedding after he uninvited my wife? AITA for refusing to give my sister the family cabin that I inherited, even though she claims she has more of a right to it? I, 36M, inherited our family's cabin 2 years ago after my father passed away. It's a modest but beautiful property tucked away in the mountains, where my family used to vacation every summer. My parents purchased it before I was born, and some of my fondest memories are tied to that cabin. Fishing with my dad, cooking marshmallows over the fire pit, and playing board games with my mom and sister during thunderstorms. The cabin was a cherished retreat for our family, but the dynamics between me and my sister, Lisa, 34F, have always been tense. Growing up, we didn't get along well. Lisa was my parents' clear favorite. They didn't try to hide it, either. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was held to stricter standards. Whenever Lisa messed up, my parents were quick to excuse her behavior. But if I slipped up, there were immediate consequences. As we grew older, Lisa became more entitled and self-centered. She never helped with chores, acted like the world owed her everything, and always assumed people would bend over backward for her. Meanwhile, I worked hard, moved out at 18, put myself through college, and built a life for myself. Lisa, on the other hand, stayed at home well into her late 20s, hopping from one dead-end job to another while my parents financially supported her. My dad's will was very clear. He left the cabin to me and split the remainder of his estate between Lisa and me. Lisa received a substantial amount of cash and some valuable family heirlooms, while I got the cabin and a smaller share of the money. I later learned that my dad chose this arrangement because he believed I would take care of the property and keep it in the family, while Lisa might just sell it for quick cash. He told me so himself in one of our last conversations before he passed. When the will was read, Lisa immediately got upset. She claimed it wasn't fair that I got the cabin while she only got money. She argued that she loved the cabin just as much as I did, and she should have been given partial ownership or at least the opportunity to buy me out. She also made it clear that she wasn't happy with her share of the estate, even though it was more than generous considering she had barely contributed anything to the family for years. Over the past 2 years, Lisa has repeatedly brought up the cabin. She's called it our family's legacy and said it's selfish of me to keep it all to myself. She's tried guilt-tripping me by bringing up childhood memories of the cabin, which is ironic because most of those memories involve me doing chores or helping Dad with repairs while Lisa sat inside reading or talking on the phone. She's also suggested that my dad only gave it to me because he didn't know how much it meant to her. The cabin holds immense sentimental value to me, and I've poured a lot of time, effort, and money into maintaining it. I've had to repair the roof, replace the plumbing, and do countless other improvements, all of which I've paid for out of my own pocket. Lisa hasn't contributed a single penny, nor has she offered to help with any of the work. Yet she continues to insist that she has just as much right to the cabin as I do. The final straw came last month when Lisa showed up unannounced at the cabin with her husband and 2 kids. They'd brought luggage and groceries, assuming they could stay for the weekend without even asking me. I was shocked but tried to remain civil. I told her that I hadn't invited them and that it wasn't okay to just show up like that. She got defensive and said, "It's not like it's only your cabin. It's the family cabin, and I shouldn't have to ask for permission to stay here." I calmly reminded her that the cabin is legally mine and that she can't just barge in whenever she feels like it. She accused me of being greedy and claimed I was hoarding the cabin to myself. She even tried to get her kids involved by saying things like, "Don't you wish Uncle Mike would share the cabin with us?" Her husband stayed quiet the whole time, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. I eventually told them they needed to leave, which led to a huge argument. Lisa called me heartless and said I was tearing the family apart by being so possessive. She stormed out, but not before threatening to take legal action to get her fair share of the cabin. I haven't heard from her directly since then, but she's been bad-mouthing me to the rest of the family. Now, several relatives have reached out to tell me I'm being unreasonable. They say the cabin is part of our family history and that I should let Lisa and her family use it, even if I don't want to share ownership. One aunt even suggested that I should let Lisa buy it from me at a family discount to keep the peace. When I pointed out that the cabin was left to me specifically because Dad trusted me to take care of it, they brushed it off as irrelevant and said I was being selfish. Sophie, my wife, supports me completely. She's seen how much work I've put into the cabin and knows how important it is to me. She's also aware of how toxic my relationship with Lisa has been over the years and thinks Lisa's behavior is manipulative. But the pressure from the rest of the family is starting to get to me. Part of me wonders if I'm being too rigid and if there's a compromise I'm not seeing. Am I the asshole for refusing to give my sister any access to the cabin? even though she claims it's just as much hers as it is mine? AITA for refusing to let my mother-in-law move in with us after she became homeless, even though my husband wants to help her. This situation has been tearing my family apart, and I'm really struggling with what to do. My husband, Jake, 35M, and I, 33F, have been married for 7 years, and we have 2 young kids, Emma, 5, and Noah, 3. We live in a fairly small house in a quiet neighborhood, and we've been doing well financially. Jake works as an IT manager, and I work as a freelance graphic designer. Our life is simple, but we're comfortable, and we value the peace and quiet we've built for our little family. Jake's mother, Linda, 58F, has always been a bit of a problem. She's had a rough life, and to put it bluntly, she's made a lot of bad decisions that have led her to be in an unstable financial situation for years. She struggled with addiction issues in the past, though she's been sober for about 5 years now. However, even without the addiction, she's never really managed to get her life together. She's been in and out of jobs, had a few failed marriages, and has relied on various forms of government assistance. Jake and I have always tried to maintain a cordial relationship with Linda. We've helped her out here and there, giving her money when she needed it, letting her stay with us for short periods of time when she lost her apartment, and offering emotional support. However, her pattern of poor decision-making has always been a strain on our relationship. She doesn't seem to learn from her mistakes, and each time we help her, it feels like we're enabling her to continue down a destructive path. Despite this, Jake has always insisted on helping her out when she asks. Recently, Linda lost her apartment again. She was living in a low-income rental, but the landlord raised the rent, and Linda couldn't afford it. This time, however, things have gotten more complicated. Linda doesn't have anywhere else to go, and she's been staying with some friends on their couch. She's been reaching out to Jake, asking if she can stay with us. Jake has been torn. He wants to help his mom, and I get that, but he knows how much stress it's caused in the past. I've expressed that I don't feel comfortable with the idea of having her live with us permanently. Jake brought the situation up a few days ago. He told me Linda was running out of options and that he was considering offering her a place to stay until she could get back on her feet. He said it would only be for a couple of months, but he'd also hinted that she might need more time. I immediately felt a pit in my stomach. I've had to deal with Linda living with us twice before, and it was an absolute nightmare both times. She's not a terrible person, but she's extremely difficult to live with. She has no sense of boundaries. She makes a mess of everything, and she can't seem to keep a schedule. It feels like having her live with us is more about maintaining a mother-child dynamic than an adult relationship. I told Jake that I didn't feel comfortable having Linda live with us again. We don't have the space, and I don't want to subject our kids to the stress of her being around all the time. She's incredibly loud, and her energy is just overwhelming. There's always drama and chaos whenever she's involved in something, and I don't want that environment around our kids. I also don't feel like it's fair to ask me to constantly sacrifice my mental and emotional well-being for someone who hasn't shown any real change. Jake got defensive. He said I was being unsympathetic and that I wasn't considering the fact that Linda was in a tough spot. He reminded me that she was his mother and that we should be there for her, especially since she's always done everything for him. He made me feel like a villain for even suggesting that she couldn't stay with us. He insisted that I was being selfish, especially since I've never had to deal with being homeless or in a tough situation like Linda. The argument escalated quickly. Jake accused me of not understanding his family's dynamics and of being unwilling to help someone who was struggling. I countered by pointing out that Linda had made poor choices her whole life and that it wasn't fair for me to be expected to bear the brunt of her decisions. I told him that I didn't think she'd be able to change, and that letting her move in would just be a temporary solution to a long-term problem. I also expressed my concern that having her in our house would strain our marriage, as it had before. At this point, I felt like I wasn't getting through to Jake, and he started to say that if I didn't agree to let her stay, he'd have to make a decision about whether to help her or not. He said it wasn't just about her. It was about his relationship with her, and if I wasn't willing to support him in helping her, it might create a permanent rift between us. The situation has only gotten worse since then. Jake's been cold and distant with me, and I've started feeling like he's choosing his mother over me. He's even said that I'm unreasonably harsh and that my refusal to help is a betrayal. Meanwhile, Linda has been calling him multiple times a day, crying and begging him to let her stay, and I know that it's putting immense pressure on him. I can't help but feel like I'm being painted as the bad guy in all of this. I've suggested alternative ways we could help her, like helping her find a new place to live or paying for a few months of rent to help her get back on her feet. But Jake insists that she needs more than just financial help. She needs a family safety net, and he's determined to provide that. I'm beginning to wonder if I'm in the wrong for not wanting to be that safety net. I want to support my husband, but I also don't want to sacrifice my peace of mind and our family stability for someone who has repeatedly made poor decisions. I'm honestly at a loss for what to do. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to let my mother-in-law move in with us, even though my husband wants to help her? AITA, for not letting my best friend's son attend my wedding after his behavior at my engagement party. I, 29F, am getting married to my fiancé, Mark, 32M, in a few months. We've been together for 5 years, and I've been planning our wedding for what feels like forever. It's been stressful but exciting, and I want it to be perfect. Most of my family and friends are supportive, but there's been an issue with my best friend, Sarah, 30F, that I'm really struggling with. Sarah and I have been close since high school. She's always been like a sister to me. Our friendship has had its ups and downs, but we've managed to work through everything over the years. Sarah is married and has a son, Ben, 12M, from her previous relationship. While I love Sarah dearly, I've always had a complicated relationship with Ben. Ben is a sweet kid, but he can be difficult at times. He has a lot of energy and is very curious, which is fine, but sometimes it feels like he doesn't understand boundaries. Over the years, I've seen a lot of his behaviors that I find difficult to tolerate. He's prone to temper tantrums when he doesn't get his way. He's very clingy, and there are times when he completely ignores what people tell him. I've always tried to be understanding, but it's been hard for me to connect with him the way I have with other kids. When we got engaged, I asked Sarah to be my maid of honor, and of course, she said yes. We started planning the engagement party, and I was really excited to have everyone come together to celebrate. It was meant to be a relaxed evening with family and friends, lots of food, drinks, and dancing. I had no idea that Ben's behavior was going to become an issue. The engagement party went well at first. Everyone was having a good time, and people were mingling. But things quickly started to go downhill when Ben started running around the venue, ignoring Sarah's attempts to get him to calm down. He was knocking into people, shouting across the room, and generally acting like he had no concept of what was appropriate in that kind of setting. Sarah did her best to control him, but he wasn't having it. At one point, he knocked over a drink that spilled all over my mom's dress. My mom was really upset, and while I know it wasn't Ben's fault entirely, I felt like there was no sense of accountability. Sarah apologized, but it felt like the situation wasn't being addressed seriously. As the night went on, things didn't get any better. Ben started throwing a tantrum when Sarah told him it was time to leave because he didn't want to go. He screamed, cried, and kicked the furniture in the venue. I tried to stay calm and polite, but at this point, I was feeling extremely uncomfortable. It was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life, but it felt like Ben's behavior was completely overshadowing everything. Finally, Sarah and Ben left early, but not before Sarah sent me a text later on, apologizing for Ben's behavior and telling me that I should try to understand that Ben is a special case. She told me that he had been struggling a lot lately with his emotions, especially since the divorce, and that she was doing her best to help him adjust. I tried to be understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ben's behavior was disruptive, and it had ruined part of the evening for me. This brings us to the present. I'm in the midst of finalizing the guest list for the wedding, and as much as I love Sarah, I've been debating whether to invite Ben. After what happened at the engagement party, I'm seriously reconsidering. I don't want my wedding to be overshadowed by tantrums or disruptive behavior. I want everyone to enjoy the day without stress, and I don't feel like Ben's behavior at the engagement party was an isolated incident. I can't help but worry that he might act out again, and it will end up ruining the atmosphere for other guests too. I talked to Mark about it, and while he's generally very understanding of my concerns, he's also made it clear that he doesn't want to cause any rifts in our friendship with Sarah. He says we can't control how Ben behaves, but it's important for us to be accommodating. I get where he's coming from, But at the same time, I feel like my wedding is one of the few moments in my life that's just for me, and I want it to go smoothly. I haven't spoken to Sarah yet about the situation, but I know that if I don't invite Ben, it will cause some tension. She'll probably be hurt and upset, and I don't want to lose her friendship over this, but I also don't want to be stressed out on my wedding day. So here's where I need help. Am I the asshole for considering not inviting Ben to my wedding because of his behavior at the engagement party? I know it might sound harsh, but I'm honestly torn. I want to maintain a good relationship with Sarah, but I also want my wedding day to be a special and stress-free occasion. AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding after she told me she wasn't coming unless her son was my ring bearer. I, 28F, am in the midst of planning my wedding to my fiancé, Dan, 30M. We're having a small, intimate ceremony with close family and friends at a venue we both love. We've been engaged for about 6 months, and the wedding has been a long time coming. My family is large and fairly close-knit, and while there have been a few hiccups along the way in the planning process, we've mostly kept things low-key. However, there's been one issue that has completely thrown me off and is causing a lot of tension with my sister, Megan, 30F. Megan and I have always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, she was always the perfect child. She was the straight-A student, the one who never got in trouble, and the one who everyone admired. In contrast, I was a bit of a rebel. I wasn't as academically inclined, and I often found myself clashing with my parents. As a result, Megan was always held in higher regard by our family, and I struggled with that dynamic for a long time. Despite our differences, we've always had each other's backs. But as we've gotten older, there's been more tension between us. Megan is married and has a 5-year-old son, Max. She's a stay-at-home mom, and her husband, Nick, is the main breadwinner. I don't have any issues with their lifestyle or their parenting choices, but it's been clear to me over the years that Megan expects special treatment because of her status as a mother. She often tries to make everything about Max, even in situations where it's not necessary. She's one of those parents who believes her child should be the center of attention, and if things don't go her way, she can be passive-aggressive about it. Now, let me explain the situation. I had a small bridal party planned for my wedding. I'm having my best friend, Chloe, 29F, as my maid of honor and my 2 cousins as bridesmaids. I wasn't planning on having any children involved in the ceremony, as it's a more formal event, and I've always envisioned a very grown-up vibe for the day. I didn't feel like it was necessary to have kids in the wedding party, and since there aren't any young nieces or nephews on my side, I didn't consider it. Dan and I both agreed we wanted our wedding to be relatively low-key and drama-free, so we made the decision to keep the bridal party small. Megan and I were texting about the wedding, and she asked if Max could be the ring bearer. At first, I was a little surprised, but I told her that we weren't having any kids in the wedding party, and that I'd like to keep things as simple as possible. I explained that we were going for a more formal vibe, and that we had already made our decisions regarding the ceremony. I thought this was a reasonable request, and would put the issue to rest. Instead of accepting my decision, Megan started getting defensive. She said that it was ridiculous that I wouldn't have Max in the wedding, and that it would mean a lot to her if he could be involved. She implied that it would hurt her feelings if I didn't include him, and that I should make an exception for family. She even told me that not having him involved would make her feel like I didn't care about her or her son. I tried to explain that it wasn't personal and that I just wanted the day to go a certain way, but Megan wasn't having it. She continued to push, saying things like, "You're going to regret not having Max in the wedding," and "What kind of aunt wouldn't want her nephew to be part of such an important day?" I felt increasingly uncomfortable, and the pressure from her was really starting to build. It wasn't just the fact that she was asking. It was the way she was making me feel like I owed her this favor. At that point, I firmly told her that I wasn't going to include Max as the ring bearer, and that I hoped she could understand my decision. I tried to be kind but firm. This is where things took a sharp turn. Megan didn't take it well. She sent me a message saying, "Fine, if Max isn't in the wedding, I'm not coming." She went on to say that it wasn't worth her time to attend if her son wasn't involved. She told me I was being unreasonable and that I was favoring other people's kids over my own nephew. She also accused me of being selfish and ignoring family, which completely caught me off guard. The whole tone of the conversation turned hostile, and I was left feeling angry, hurt, and confused. I talked to Dan about it, and he was shocked by how Megan was acting. He told me that it was my day, and I shouldn't feel pressure to change my plans just because Megan wanted to make it all about Max. Dan said he thought Megan was being unreasonable and that I shouldn't let her dictate the terms of the wedding. However, my parents have been more sympathetic to Megan's side. They said that it was just a small ask and that I should consider making an exception for her. They mentioned how it would mean a lot to Megan and that I should try to avoid causing a family rift over something so trivial. But I don't think it's trivial. To me, it's about boundaries. I've worked hard to plan a wedding that feels true to my vision, and I don't think I should have to sacrifice that just to accommodate one person's request, especially when that person is making me feel guilty and manipulated. I don't want to start my marriage by allowing someone to bulldoze over my decisions. So, here I am. I've decided that I'm not going to let Megan's behavior dictate the terms of my wedding. I've told her that if she feels so strongly about Max being involved, then I respect her decision to not come. I made it clear that I love her, but I can't let her put that kind of pressure on me. The fallout has been worse than I expected. Megan is refusing to talk to me, and she's been telling other family members that I'm heartless and selfish. I've received several calls from family members asking me to reconsider, but I'm sticking to my guns. I don't think I've done anything wrong, but I'm starting to wonder if I'm being too rigid. So, Reddit. AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding after she demanded her son be the ring bearer, even though I said no. AITA for not allowing my best friend to bring her kids to my wedding after she made it clear she wouldn't attend without them. I, 29F, am getting married in 6 months to my fiancé, Luke, 31M. We've been together for 4 years, and our wedding has been a long time in the making. Luke and I have always wanted a smaller, more intimate wedding with close friends and family. We've been very intentional about who we've invited, trying to keep things low-key but still meaningful. Now, I need to give some context about my best friend, Rachel, 30F. We've been best friends since college, and we've always had a very close relationship. Rachel is married to Dave, 32M, and they have 3 kids, Tyler, 8M, Emma, 6F, and Noah, 4M. I absolutely love Rachel and her family, but there's been an issue that I've been struggling with for the past few weeks, and I honestly don't know if I'm in the wrong for how I'm handling it. When I first started planning the wedding, I had a vision in mind, something elegant but simple. I've always dreamed of having a smaller ceremony with about 80 guests, mostly immediate family and a handful of close friends. Luke and I both agreed that we didn't want a wedding that was too chaotic, and we wanted to keep the focus on our love and commitment to each other. When I sent out the invitations a couple of months ago, I specifically mentioned on the invites that the wedding would be an adults-only event. I didn't want to have kids running around, disrupting the ceremony, or creating more chaos than necessary. I wasn't trying to be rude or exclude anyone, but I wanted to ensure the day was as stress-free as possible, and I felt like the decision would make things easier for everyone involved. Rachel was one of the first people I invited, and I was excited to have her there. She's been a huge part of my life, and I can't imagine the day without her. However, when I gave her the invitation, she immediately expressed concern about not being able to bring her kids. She told me that she wouldn't be able to attend if she couldn't bring all 3 of them. She said that her kids were her priority and that she couldn't leave them with anyone else, especially since they were still fairly young. She also mentioned that she didn't have any family members or friends close by who could look after them for the evening. I was taken aback by her reaction. I hadn't expected her to react this way, and I honestly didn't know how to handle it. I told her that I completely understood that her kids were important to her, but I explained that I had already made it clear that the wedding was going to be adults only. I told her that I hoped she would still be able to attend, but I needed her to respect my decision about the guest list. Rachel seemed to take my response well, or at least that's what I thought. She said she would talk to Dave and figure something out. But the next time we spoke, Rachel started bringing up the issue again. She told me she'd tried to find a babysitter but hadn't been able to find someone she trusted with her kids, and that she just couldn't imagine leaving them at home with anyone else. She said she wanted to support me on my big day, but if she couldn't bring her kids, then she wouldn't feel comfortable coming at all. At first, I tried to explain to her again that it wasn't personal, that I loved her and her kids, but that I really wanted to keep the wedding a more intimate event without kids running around. I told her that I wanted everyone to enjoy the day without distractions, and that it wasn't a reflection of how I felt about her or her family. I also reiterated that I had made this decision with Luke, and it wasn't something I was going to change. But Rachel wasn't having it. She kept insisting that I was being unreasonable and that she couldn't just leave her kids with anyone. She even started mentioning that it was unfair for me to expect her to come without her kids, given how close we were and how much she had supported me over the years. She said that if I couldn't make an exception for her, it would hurt her feelings and create a huge rift in our friendship. This is where I started to get frustrated. I've always been there for Rachel, and I've supported her through everything from her marriage to her kids' milestones. I've never asked her to choose between her kids and our friendship, but it felt like she was asking me to compromise on something that was really important to me, my wedding day. I started feeling like she was being selfish and manipulative, as if I owed her the favor of letting her kids come just because she had 3 kids. I told Rachel that I had made my decision and that I couldn't make exceptions for her or anyone else. I explained that I didn't want to have a wedding where people were upset or uncomfortable about my decisions. I wanted it to be a day of celebration, and that meant keeping things simple and focused on the adults in attendance. I also told her that if she couldn't attend without her kids, I would understand, but I was still sticking to my guns about the adults-only rule. Rachel didn't take that well at all. She became upset, accusing me of being selfish and inconsiderate, and saying that I didn't understand how hard it was for her to leave her kids. She said I was being unreasonable and that I shouldn't expect her to choose between our friendship and her kids. She even went so far as to say that I clearly didn't value our friendship enough to make an exception for her family. She started making passive-aggressive comments, saying things like, "It must be nice to have a wedding where everything goes according to plan, with no real responsibilities like kids." I tried to explain that it wasn't about not valuing her friendship, but about wanting to create a certain atmosphere for my wedding. But no matter what I said, Rachel just seemed to get angrier. Eventually, she told me that if I wasn't going to allow her to bring her kids, then she wouldn't be coming, and that would be the end of it. She also told me she didn't want to cause drama and that she would respect my decision, but it was clear that she was hurt. Now, I'm starting to feel like I've made a mistake. I've always valued Rachel's friendship, but I also feel like I'm entitled to have the wedding I've always dreamed of without feeling pressured to change my rules for one person. I feel like I've been as understanding as possible, but I don't want to be manipulated into making exceptions for anyone, especially when I've been clear about my intentions from the start. So, Reddit, AITA for not allowing my best friend to bring her kids to my wedding after she made it clear she wouldn't attend without them. AITA for refusing to let my parents move in with me after they lost their house. I, 28M, have always had a strained relationship with my parents. Growing up, I was the black sheep of the family, and while I love them, we had very different values and expectations. I've always been independent and worked hard to make my way in the world, and over the years, that independence has grown into a sort of self-reliance that I'm proud of. This situation has tested that to the limit. A little background on my parents. They've never been financially responsible. They both have jobs. My mom works in retail and my dad is in construction, but they've never been great with budgeting or saving. They constantly made poor financial decisions, took on debt they couldn't afford, and generally lived beyond their means. For a long time, I tried to help them with advice or small loans, but after a while, it became clear that they didn't really want to change their ways, and their problems just kept spiraling. Around a year ago, they lost their house. They had been behind on their mortgage payments for months, and eventually, the bank foreclosed. They didn't have anywhere to go and had to move in with my aunt for a while, but that situation wasn't ideal for them, so they started looking for a new place. Things didn't improve financially for them, though. They kept racking up debt and falling further behind. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and I got a call from my mom. She told me that they were in a bad spot, had nowhere else to go, and asked if they could move in with me. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city that I love, and I've worked hard to make it my own space. I also have a pretty decent job. I work as a software engineer and have a comfortable lifestyle, but I live alone, and I like having my space to relax and unwind after work. I've always been someone who values my independence and privacy. I know it sounds harsh, but I told my mom that I couldn't let them move in. The main reason is that I've seen this pattern too many times. My parents ask for help, and it's a temporary fix at best. They never change their behavior, and they just end up making the same mistakes over and over. I can't keep enabling them by letting them live with me indefinitely. I also know they're not financially responsible enough to contribute fairly to rent, bills, or anything else. They've had chances to fix their financial situation, and they never have. I've helped them in the past with small loans and advice, but every time, they've gone right back to their old habits. I was honest with her and told her that I just couldn't do it. It would put too much strain on me, and I don't feel comfortable having them in my space, especially given how things have gone in the past. She was upset, but I stuck to my decision. The fallout has been intense. My mom has been calling me nonstop, asking if I'm sure about my decision. She's telling me that I'm being selfish, that families should take care of each other, and that I'm abandoning them in their time of need. She's also been telling anyone who will listen that I refuse to help them and that I don't care about family. My dad has been more silent about it, but I know he's upset too. My aunt, who's always been the one to pick up the slack when my parents need help, is now upset with me as well. She thinks I should have stepped up and taken them in, as she's done so many times before. But I don't feel like it's fair to put that burden on me, especially when I've already given them so many chances to get their lives together. Now, a few of my friends have started to weigh in. Some agree with me and say that it's not my responsibility to keep enabling them. They say that I've already done what I can and shouldn't feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. But others think I'm being heartless. One of my closest friends said that I'm being too harsh and that it's not like I'm struggling financially, so I should just help them out. Another friend said that I'll regret not stepping up when they need me the most. I've been feeling really torn about this whole situation. On one hand, I don't want to be the person who turns their back on their family. But on the other hand, I don't want to sacrifice my own mental health and comfort for people who have proven time and time again that they're not willing to change their behaviors. It's been a hard decision, and I'm really struggling with the guilt, especially since my mom keeps calling me and telling me how much they need help. But I also don't want to live with them in my apartment for who knows how long, only to find myself stuck in the same cycle of them not changing and me getting drained. So, AITA for refusing to let my parents move in with me after they lost their house, even though I'm in a position where I could afford to help them. AITA for not attending my sister's wedding because I'm uncomfortable with the groom. I, 30F, am in a bit of a family conflict that's making me question if I'm being unreasonable. I'm the eldest of 3 siblings, and my sister, 26F, is getting married next month. I'll start by saying I love my sister. We've had our ups and downs growing up, but over the years we've gotten closer, and I genuinely want what's best for her. However, I've been feeling uneasy about her fiancé, and that's causing some major tension in our relationship. A bit of background: my sister's fiancé, Dan, 29M, is a guy I've known for a while. I met him about 3 years ago when they first started dating. At first, I was happy for her because she seemed to really like him. He was kind of quiet and didn't have the most outgoing personality, but he seemed sweet enough. Over time, though, I started noticing some red flags that made me uncomfortable. Dan has a bit of a temper, and while he's generally quiet, when he does speak, it's often in a condescending or passive-aggressive way. There have been multiple times when I've seen him make comments about my sister's weight, her appearance, or her life choices, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't anything overtly malicious, but the way he'd speak to her was borderline belittling. For example, when she decided to take a break from her job to travel, he told her that she should get her life together and stop acting like a child. He didn't even offer any support for her dreams. She brushed it off, but I couldn't help but feel like there was something off about how he treated her. I've tried talking to my sister about it a few times, but every time I bring up concerns, she gets defensive. She tells me I'm being too overprotective and that she's an adult who can make her own decisions. The thing is, I don't think I'm being overprotective. I'm just genuinely worried for her. I've seen how her confidence has taken a hit since they've been together. She's become more withdrawn and anxious, and I can't help but feel like it's because of the way Dan undermines her. Despite my concerns, my sister has been insistent that he's the one for her, and I've tried to accept it. I've been to their engagement party, met with Dan on several occasions, and attended a few of their get-togethers. But each time, I find myself feeling more and more uncomfortable around him. He's been dismissive of me too, making jokes about my career and my personal life, things that no one would find funny, especially when it's done in front of my sister. It feels like he's trying to exert some sort of control or superiority, And while she defends him every time, I can't just ignore how it makes me feel. Here's where things get complicated. My sister's wedding is coming up, and I've been asked to be her maid of honor. I agreed because in my heart, I want to support her. She's my sister, after all. But I'm struggling with the idea of standing by her side on her wedding day when I know deep down that I don't fully support her decision to marry Dan. I've been avoiding the wedding planning as much as possible, and every time we have a conversation about it, I find myself getting increasingly agitated. The more I think about it, the more I feel like attending this wedding would be a form of endorsement for their relationship. And I can't do that. I can't pretend that everything is okay when I'm worried about how Dan treats her and the way he's been negatively affecting her. I can't stand there and smile while watching her marry a man I believe is emotionally controlling her, even if she doesn't see it. So, I told my sister that I don't think I can be her maid of honor anymore. I explained that I love her, but I just can't support the wedding because of my concerns about Dan. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable standing next to her on such an important day when I wasn't fully behind her choice. She was heartbroken. She cried and begged me to change my mind. She said that it wasn't fair to ruin her day over my personal issues with Dan. She said that I was being selfish and that I was putting my own feelings above her happiness. My parents got involved, and they're all upset with me. They think I should be more supportive, that I should just go to the wedding and put my feelings aside for the sake of family. They told me that it's her decision, and I need to respect that. My mom told me I was being immature for not attending, and my dad said I was making a mountain out of a molehill. I feel like I'm being backed into a corner here. On one hand, I really want to be there for my sister, but on the other hand, I don't want to pretend that everything is okay when it's not. I don't want to enable her to make what I believe is a huge mistake. But I also don't want to lose my sister over this. I've been getting a lot of pressure from family members to go and support her, even if it's just for the sake of the day. But every time I think about it, I just feel like I can't pretend that everything is fine when I feel like she's making a choice that will hurt her in the long run. I don't want to be the one who causes drama at the wedding, but I also don't want to be complicit in something I feel uncomfortable with. So, AITA for not attending my sister's wedding because I'm uncomfortable with her fiancé and feel like I can't support the marriage. AITA for telling my friend I won't attend her wedding after she invited my ex as a guest. I, 29F, have been friends with Emma, 30F, for almost 10 years now. We met in college and have been through a lot together, good and bad. Emma has always been one of those people who's extremely social, and she has a lot of friends. She's the type of person who loves to host, loves big events, and is very outgoing. I'm a little more reserved, but we've always balanced each other out. We both got into relationships around the same time, and our friendship has been relatively drama-free until recently. I've been in a long-term relationship with Ryan, 30M, for almost 6 years. Ryan and I have had our ups and downs, but overall, we're happy. He's my best friend, and we've been through a lot together. Recently, things have been going really well for us. We're stable, happy, and I can honestly see us getting married one day. Emma is now planning her wedding, which is happening in a few months, and she's been busy making arrangements and figuring out the guest list. We've been talking about it for a while, and I've been really excited for her, though I wasn't entirely sure about some of her decisions. Emma has a big social circle, so I assumed she was going to invite a lot of people, including exes and people she used to be close to. But one of the decisions she made has caused a huge issue between us, and I'm struggling to decide if I'm in the wrong here. Last week, Emma sent out her wedding invitations, and I got mine in the mail. I was excited to open it until I saw the name on the invitation. Ryan was listed as a guest. My first reaction was confusion, because I know Emma and Ryan have never really gotten along. Emma and Ryan have always had a tense relationship, and I thought that she'd made it clear she didn't really like him. They've never gotten along well, and while Emma has never been outright rude to him, she's always made snide comments about him being too quiet or too serious. Ryan and I discussed it, and I felt weird about it. I've never thought Emma had any real issues with Ryan, but there's always been some underlying tension when we're all in the same room. But we've managed to get through family gatherings and parties without any major issues. Still, I didn't expect her to invite him to her wedding, so I called Emma to ask her about it. When I asked her why she invited Ryan, she explained that she was trying to be inclusive and fair by inviting all of her friends' significant others. I asked her if she realized that Ryan and I are in a committed relationship, and she said she thought it would be awkward if he wasn't invited because he's a big part of your life. She assured me that she had no ill intentions, but that she just didn't want to make any issues out of it. I still wasn't sure how to react, so I told Emma I needed to think about it. I don't know if anyone else has been in a similar situation, but I found the idea of Ryan being invited to the wedding incredibly uncomfortable. It wasn't just that I felt like Emma and Ryan weren't exactly friends. It was that there had been tension between them for years. I didn't want to create a scene or make things awkward at her wedding, but I also didn't want to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I talked to Ryan about it, and he was also uncomfortable with the idea of attending. He said he'd rather not go to the wedding than deal with the awkwardness, especially since he's never been particularly close with Emma. We both agreed that it might be better if we just didn't attend the wedding at all if Emma was going to insist on inviting him. I decided to have a frank conversation with Emma. I told her that I appreciated her trying to be inclusive, but that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of Ryan being at her wedding, especially since their relationship has always been so strained. I explained that I didn't want to put him in a position where he felt uncomfortable, and I also didn't want to be in an environment where tension could ruin the day. I suggested that maybe she could invite one of my other friends instead of Ryan, or that she could just make the wedding about the people she's closest to. Emma got upset. She said I was overthinking things, and that she wasn't trying to cause any issues. She said that if I couldn't accept her decision, then I should just stay home. She called me selfish and said I was putting my relationship with Ryan over her wedding day, which was a huge deal for her. She accused me of trying to control who's invited to her wedding and said that if I wasn't going to be supportive, I shouldn't come at all. I was taken aback by her response as I didn't think I was being controlling. I was just trying to avoid making things awkward or uncomfortable for anyone involved. The situation has gotten worse since then. Emma has told other friends about my refusal to attend, and now they're all weighing in. Some agree with me, saying that it's understandable that I don't want to be in an awkward situation at her wedding. Others say that I'm overreacting and that I should just go and support Emma regardless of the guest list. Some people think I should try to reconcile the tension between Emma and Ryan and go for the sake of our long friendship. Meanwhile, Ryan is still adamant that he doesn't want to go if he's going to be around people who clearly don't like him. I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I want to be there for Emma on her big day, but I don't want to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. At the same time, I don't want to let my relationship with Ryan become a reason for Emma to feel hurt or upset, but I also don't think it's fair to invite someone who's made it clear they don't like him. I'm feeling guilty about the whole thing because I know this is important to Emma, but I also don't want to be put in a position where I'm uncomfortable. So, AITA for telling my friend I won't attend her wedding after she invited my ex as a guest?